The howling Montana wind carried Sarah Miller's footsteps away as she approached the dilapidated shed. Each step crunched against fresh snow, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. She'd heard rumors, whispers exchanged at the local diner, concerned glances between neighbors. Something was wrong at old Jack Thompson's property. The padlock was rusted but sturdy. Sarah pressed her ear against the weathered door. A faint whimper, barely audible above the wind, sent chills through her that had nothing to do with the cold. She'd seen enough suffering in Afghanistan to recognize its sound. "Hello," she whispered, her voice catching. The whimpering stopped. Then came a weak scratch against the door. Sarah's flashlight beam caught the small window. Covered with years of grime, she wiped a small circle clean and peered inside. What she saw made her stomach lurch. Two amber eyes reflecting her light. Sunken into a skeletal face, a German shepherd, once powerful, now little more than bones and matted fur, chained to the wall in a space barely large enough to turn around. Behind her, the rumble of motorcycles grew louder. Headlights swept the property. Sarah had minutes, maybe seconds. "I'll be back," she promised the eyes watching her. "Hold on." Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching. From now, let's continue with the story. Max had been legendary in Pinewood County, the most decorated canine officer in the department's history. German shepherds were common enough in police work. But Max possessed an intelligence that bordered on uncanny. At 8 years old, his service record included finding 6 missing children, detecting narcotics in the county's largest drug bust, and once, memorably, pulling Officer David Wilson from a burning vehicle after a high-speed chase went wrong. His coat had once gleamed black and tan under the Montana sun during community demonstrations, where children would marvel at his discipline and adults would applaud his precision. Those were the days when Max carried himself with the dignity of his breeding and training head high. Ears alert, eyes focused with unwavering attention on his handler, Officer David Wilson had been Max's world, a decorated 20-year veteran of the force. Wilson spoke of Max as the best partner I ever had. Local newspapers frequently featured photographs of the pair receiving commendations. Wilson's hand steady on Max's shoulder. The dog sitting proudly at attention. They were inseparable. Until suddenly, they weren't. Sarah Miller understood devotion like that. At 42, her face weathered by Afghan sun and the hardships that followed her return home. Sarah had channeled her medical training and military discipline into creating Second Chance Ranch. The 10-acre property outside Pinewood served as sanctuary for animals others had discarded. The irony wasn't lost on her as a child. She'd been terrified of dogs after a neighbor's Rottweiler had attacked her, leaving scars on her right arm that she still traced absent-mindedly when nervous. Then there was Jack Thompson, at 56. His face was a roadmap of hard living, his arms covered in faded tattoos from another lifetime. Locals knew him as the former president of the Steel Wheels, a motorcycle club with a reputation that made mothers call their children inside when bikes roared through town. After serving time for assault 15 years back, Jack had withdrawn to the edges of society. Living in a small cabin at the outskirts of Pinewood, he rarely came to town except for supplies. And when he did, conversations stopped and spaces cleared around him. What connected these three, a missing police dog, a former soldier, and an aging biker, was about to unravel a truth Pinewood wasn't prepared to face. The day that altered 3 lives began like any other in Pinewood County. It was mid-June, nearly 4 years earlier, when Officer David Wilson and Max responded to what should have been a routine drug bust at an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. Intelligence suggested a small operation, nothing the decorated K-9 unit hadn't handled dozens of times before. The summer heat had been oppressive that day, the air thick with humidity as Wilson released Max with the command they'd practiced thousands of times. "Search," he'd said, and Max moved with precision through the dimly lit space, nose working methodically near the ground. Within minutes, Max's body language changed the slight stiffening of his posture, the focused intensity that Wilson recognized immediately as a positive alert. What neither of them expected was Kevin Thompson hiding behind the stack of crates where Max had indicated narcotics were stored. At 23, Kevin carried his father's defiance but none of his caution. When cornered, the young man had pulled a switchblade, desperation in his eyes. "Police, drop the weapon," Wilson had shouted. But Kevin was already lunging forward. Max did what he'd been trained to do, protect his handler. His powerful jaws clamped onto Kevin's arm, the force of his attack bringing the young man to the ground with a scream that echoed through the warehouse. The knife clattered against concrete as backup officers rushed in. The injury required 27 stitches. Jack Thompson arrived at the county hospital to find his son handcuffed to a bed, his arm bandaged, facing charges that would eventually lead to a 7-year sentence for possession with intent to distribute. It wasn't Kevin's first offense, but it was the one that would define him. That dog is nothing but a weapon they point at whoever they want. Jack had snarled in the hospital corridor, his voice carrying to where Wilson stood filling out paperwork. Their eyes met briefly, a moment of pure hatred passing between them. 6 months later, the announcement came without warning. Officer David Wilson was retiring after 20 years of exemplary service. The department held a modest ceremony, but something was notably absent Max. When questioned, Wilson claimed the dog had been rehomed to a special facility for retired K-9s. But no one seemed to know exactly where. Rumors circulated through the department. Some said Max had been put down after showing aggression. Others suggested he'd been privately sold to another department. Whatever the truth, David Wilson suddenly had enough money for a cabin on Flathead Lake and a new truck, luxuries his pension shouldn't have covered, for months. Max vanished from public memory, becoming little more than an occasional reference when old cases were discussed. Life in Pinewood continued. David Wilson enjoyed his retirement fishing and traveling. Jack Thompson retreated further into isolation after his son began his prison sentence. No one connected the occasional sounds neighbors heard coming from Jack's property, distant barking that eventually faded to whimpers, then to silence. No one questioned why Jack, who'd never owned pets, suddenly began purchasing dog food at the general store. No one noticed the small shed behind his cabin had a new padlock. Inside that shed, Max's world had shrunk to a space barely 8 feet by 6 feet. The floor was dirt, partially covered with old blankets that carried Jack's scent. A metal bowl occasionally filled with water, and another with cheap kibble constituted the entirety of his possessions. A heavy chain connected his collar to an iron ring bolted into the wall, allowing just enough movement to stand and turn around. The first months, Max had barked continuously, his trained mind unable to comprehend what he'd done wrong or why his handler had disappeared. He scratched at the door until his paws bled. He pulled against the chain until his neck was raw. Eventually, as seasons changed outside his small window, something in Max began to change too. The proud bearing of his shoulders gradually slumped. The alertness in his eyes dimmed. When Jack would enter to provide food and water, Max no longer growled or lunged, he cowered. The once powerful muscles atrophied from confinement and poor nutrition. Most significantly, his hind legs began to fail him, the result of an injury sustained when Jack had dragged him into the shed that first night. combined with years of immobility and neglect. For 4 years, this was Max's existence, a shadow life hidden behind padlocked doors while just miles away. The community he had served continued unaware. Officer Wilson never spoke of him. The police department filed no inquiries about his whereabouts. Jack's neighbors, though occasionally curious about sounds from his property, knew better than to ask questions of a man with his reputation, until the day 14-year-old Lily Carson took a shortcut through the woods behind Jack Thompson's property and heard something that stopped her in her tracks, the faint, hoarse sound of a dog crying. Lily Carson wasn't supposed to be cutting through Jack Thompson's property that Wednesday afternoon. Her mother had explicitly forbidden it. Like most parents in Pinewood who viewed the former biker with a mixture of fear and suspicion, but the path shaved 15 minutes off her walk home from the library, and at 14, Lily had developed a selective memory regarding parental instructions. The late April day had brought the first real warmth of spring to Montana, melting patches of stubborn snow and coaxing green shoots from the thawing earth. Lily had paused to photograph a cluster of early wildflowers with her phone when she heard it, a sound so faint she might have missed it entirely if a sudden gust hadn't carried it directly to her. A whimper, followed by the slight jangle of metal against metal. Curiosity overcame caution as she followed the sound to a weathered shed partially hidden behind Jack's cabin. No vehicles were visible in the dirt driveway. Jack was likely in town for his weekly supply run. Lily approached the small, grimy window, standing on tiptoes to peer inside. What she saw haunted her dreams for weeks afterward, a skeletal dog lying on filthy blankets, chains stretched taut from collar to wall. The animal barely lifted its head at her shadow across the window, but its eyes, amber and deep, with an intelligence that seemed almost human, locked onto hers with such desperate hope that Lily felt tears spring to her eyes. "I'll be back," she whispered against the glass. "I promise." For 2 weeks, Lily kept her word, sneaking to the shed when she could be certain Jack was away. She brought water in plastic bottles, bits of chicken and beef smuggled from family dinners, even her own blanket when she noticed the dog shivering one cooler evening. Each visit revealed more the canine tattoo in the dog's ear, partially obscured by matting, the way he struggled to stand on his hind legs, how, despite his condition, he never growled or snapped, even when clearly in pain. "I don't know what to do." Lily finally confessed to her Aunt Sarah over dinner at the ranch. "Mom would kill me if she knew I was on his property, but that dog's gonna die if somebody doesn't help." Sarah Miller had seen enough suffering to recognize the urgency in her niece's eyes. After dinner, she spread old newspapers across her kitchen table, years of archived editions of the Pinewood Gazette she'd collected since returning to her hometown. "What did this dog look like exactly?" she asked, flipping through yellowed pages. "German Shepherd, I think. Really skinny now, but you can tell he used to be big." Lily described, "Oh, and he has this tattoo in his ear like a number, and the letters K9. Sarah's hands stilled on a front-page photograph from 5 years earlier. It showed Officer David Wilson receiving a commendation, a proud German Shepherd sitting at attention beside him. The caption read, "Officer Wilson and K9 partner Max honored for bravery in Riverside rescue." "Is this him?" Sarah asked, pushing the paper toward Lily. The girl's eyes widened. "That's him, I mean. He looks way different now. But those eyes, I'd recognize them anywhere." Sarah felt something cold settle in her stomach. Max had been local law enforcement's star, featured regularly in community outreach programs. Her time overseas meant she'd missed his mysterious disappearance. But the situation was clear enough. A decorated police dog was being held captive and abused. The next morning, Sarah drove to the Pinewood Sheriff's Department. Newspaper clippings and Lily's cell phone photos in hand, Sheriff Tom Roberts, a man whose expanding waistline reflected his 15 years behind a desk, listened to her account with thinning patience. "Ms. Miller, with all due respect, this is hardly a priority," he said, barely glancing at the photos. "Thompson's property is private. For all we know, he purchased that dog legally." "This isn't just any dog," Sarah insisted. "This is Max, the department's K-9 officer. Look at the tattoo. Check your records." Sheriff Roberts leaned back in his chair, something unreadable crossing his features. Max was officially retired and rehomed years ago. Officer Wilson handled all the arrangements personally. Rehomed to a shed, chained to a wall. Sarah's voice rose. "I'd advise you to stay off Thompson's property," Roberts replied, standing to indicate the conversation was over. "He's not a man who appreciates trespassers." That evening, Sarah sat at her kitchen table, nursing a cup of tea gone cold as she studied the photographs again. The sheriff's dismissal felt wrong, not just bureaucratic indifference, but something more deliberate. She thought of the dog's eyes, of the history captured in newspaper clippings of his service, of the contrast between the proud animal in those photos and the broken creature in her niece's pictures. 3 days later, Sarah parked her truck half a mile from Jack's property and approached on foot, medical bag slung over her shoulder. Her Army training made her movements quiet, deliberate. 4 years as a medic in combat zones had taught her to evaluate risk dispassionately, and this risk she deemed necessary. The shed door's padlock was heavy-duty but old. Sarah had brought bolt cutters. Having anticipated this obstacle, the metal gave way with a sharp snap that seemed to echo through the silent forest. Heart pounding, she eased the door open. The smell hit her first: ammonia, feces, the sour odor of neglect and illness. As her eyes adjusted to the dimness, she saw Max huddled in the corner, his chain pulled tight. He made no sound, but his eyes followed her every movement. "Hey there," Sarah whispered, kneeling slowly. "Remember me? I'm here to help you." She extended her hand, palm up, allowing him to catch her scent. Max's nostrils flared slightly, but he made no move toward her. Sarah inched closer, medical assessment running automatically through her mind: severe malnutrition, possible dehydration, muscle atrophy, pressure sores where the collar had rubbed fur away. "We're getting you out of here," she murmured, reaching for the chain. The crunch of tires on gravel outside froze her in place. Headlights swept across the small window as a vehicle pulled up to the cabin. Doors slammed, followed by voices: Jack Thompson's distinctive growl and another man's deeper tone. Sarah's military training kicked in. Assess options, calculate risks, decide. She could try to complete the rescue, risking confrontation with Jack and his unknown companion, or retreat, regroup, return better prepared. Max watched her, something like resignation in his gaze, as if he'd seen hope appear and disappear before. The decision was made for her when the shed door crashed open, silhouetting Jack Thompson's massive frame against the fading daylight. "What the hell do you think you're doing on my property?" he demanded, voice dangerously quiet. Sarah stood slowly, positioning herself between Jack and Max. "This dog needs medical attention. He was a police K-9 officer. You have no right." "I have every right," Jack interrupted, stepping into the shed. "And you're trespassing." Behind him appeared the second man, Officer David Wilson, now retired. his face ashen as he stared at the dog he'd once called Partner. Sarah Miller's medical bag lay at her feet, its contents gauze, antibiotics, a makeshift harness, now useless in the face of Jack Thompson's fury and the unexpected appearance of Officer Wilson. The small shed suddenly felt suffocating, the air thick with tension and the acrid smell of neglect. "David Wilson," Sarah said, recognition dawning as she studied the retired officer's face. "Max's handler." Wilson's eyes darted between Sarah and the dog, discomfort evident in his rigid posture. "I don't know what you think you're doing, ma'am, but you need to leave." Behind her, Max had managed to rise to his feet, front legs trembling with the effort of supporting his emaciated body. A low whine escaped him, not threatening, but plaintive, almost questioning, as he stared at his former handler. "You know exactly what I'm doing," Sarah replied, her medic's training giving her voice a steadiness her racing heart belied. "I'm trying to save an animal that served this community, that saved lives. The real question is, what are you doing here with the man who's been abusing your partner?" Jack's laugh was harsh in the confined space. "Partner? That what you call it when you sell your partner down the river?" Wilson's face flushed dark red. "Shut your mouth, Thompson, or what you'll arrest me not wearing a badge anymore." "Are you?" Jack stepped further into the shed, forcing Sarah to press back against the wall. "This is my property. That's my dog, and you're trespassing." "Your dog?" Sarah challenged, anger temporarily overriding caution. "He has a service number tattooed in his ear. He was police property. Not something to be sold or given away, certainly not to be chained in a shed for years." Wilson moved forward then, placing a restraining hand on Jack's arm that the bigger man immediately shrugged off. "Look," he said to Sarah, conciliatory now. "There's been a misunderstanding. Max was retired from service. The department has procedures for rehoming K-9s. Everything was done by the book." "By the book?" Sarah echoed incredulously, gesturing toward Max. "Does this look like proper rehoming to you? He's starving. He can barely stand. This isn't retirement, it's torture." And something flickered across Wilson's face. Guilt, perhaps, or fear. "Thompson, give us a minute," he said quietly. Jack's eyes narrowed, but after a tense moment, he stepped outside, leaving the door open, a clear message that escape wasn't an option. Wilson moved closer to Max, who shrank back as far as his chain would allow. The retired officer crouched, extending a hand that the dog pointedly ignored. "Max was decommissioned 4 years ago," he explained without looking at Sarah. "He was getting older, starting to miss alerts. Department policy is to rehome when possible. To a known felon with a grudge against police." Sarah's skepticism was evident. "Try again, officer." Wilson stood, his expression hardening. "You don't understand the situation." "I understand enough," Sarah countered. "I understand that a decorated police dog disappeared without explanation. I understand that you suddenly had money for a lakefront property on a cop's pension. I understand that Max has been suffering while you've been fishing." Wilson stepped closer, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "You have no idea what you're getting into. Take my advice, walk away. Forget what you saw here." "Not happening," Sarah replied evenly. "I'm taking Max with me. He needs immediate veterinary care." "That won't be possible." Jack had reappeared in the doorway, cell phone in hand. "I've called the sheriff." "Trespassing, breaking and entering, attempted theft, that's what. 5 years minimum. Hope your little rescue mission was worth it." Sarah's mind raced through options. Sheriff Roberts had already made his position clear. He wouldn't help. If arrested, Max would remain here, his condition deteriorating further. She needed time and leverage. "Before the sheriff arrives," she said carefully, "maybe you'd like to explain to me why a man who hates cops so much would want to keep a police dog." Jack's expression remained impassive, but something flickered in his eyes. "Maybe I just like the irony." Sarah took a calculated risk. "Or maybe it has something to do with your son, Kevin, the one Max took down during that drug bust." The atmosphere in the shed seemed to freeze. Wilson's head snapped toward Jack, alarm evident in his expression. "Thompson, my son got 7 years because of this dog," Jack interrupted, his voice low and dangerous. 7 years for a couple of pills. Meanwhile, the real players walked. Funny how that works, isn't it? Wilson. Understanding began to dawn on Sarah. The connections between these men were deeper and darker than she'd initially realized. She needed to buy time to document Max's condition before authorities arrived. "Let me at least examine him," she said, gesturing toward her medical bag. "Whatever happens with me, he needs care. You don't want animal cruelty charges on top of everything else." Jack considered her for a long moment before nodding curtly. "Make it quick, and don't try anything stupid." Sarah knelt beside Max, speaking softly as she ran professional hands over his body, cataloging injuries and signs of neglect. 4 years of confinement had taken their toll. Pressure sores where the collar had rubbed his neck raw, joints stiff from disuse, ribs prominent under dull fur. Most concerning was the muscle wasting in his hind legs and the pronounced curve in his spine. As she worked, Sarah surreptitiously activated the voice recording app on her phone, tucked into her jacket pocket. Whatever happened next, there would be evidence. "His spine's been damaged," she announced, looking up at Jack. "That's why he can't use his back legs properly. Did you do this to him?" Jack's face darkened. "I didn't cripple the dog." "Then who did?" Sarah pressed. "That's enough," Wilson interjected sharply. "Sheriff's on his way. Pack up your stuff." The distant wail of sirens punctuated his words. Sarah quickly completed her examination, slipping Max a piece of jerky from her pocket along with a small antibiotic hidden inside. It wasn't much, but it was something. As she stood, she locked eyes with the dog, trying to convey a promise, "I'll be back." What followed was exactly what Sarah had feared. Sheriff Roberts arrived with 2 deputies, barely glancing at Max as he took Jack's statement. Sarah found herself handcuffed, her protests about the dog's condition dismissed. "Animal welfare concerns can be filed through proper channels," Roberts informed her coldly. "Breaking and entering is still a crime, regardless of your intentions." As the deputies led her toward the patrol car, Sarah locked eyes with Lily, who had appeared at the edge of the property, obviously having followed her aunt out of concern. "Tell Ellen," Sarah called out, referring to Ellen Dawson, her friend and local veterinarian. "Show her the pictures." The ensuing weeks transformed Sarah Miller from a private citizen into an unlikely activist, released on bail pending trial. She found herself barred from approaching Jack's property, but not from speaking out, with Lily's photographs as evidence and her own medical assessment. Sarah began building community awareness about Max's situation. The Pinewood Gazette, initially reluctant to touch the story given Jack Thompson's reputation, finally ran a feature after pressure from several local business owners who remembered Max from community events. "Hero Canine Officer Found in Deplorable Conditions," read the headline, accompanied by Lily's heartbreaking photographs. The community's reaction was immediate and divided. Many were outraged, particularly those who remembered Max's service. Others, skeptical of Sarah's methods, questioned her right to interfere with private property. A small but vocal contingent supported Jack, arguing that a man had the right to keep a dog however he chose. Ellen Dawson, armed with Sarah's observations and the photographs, filed official complaints with County Animal Control and the State Veterinary Board. When these were mysteriously delayed, she escalated to state-level animal welfare organizations, bringing outside attention to Pinewood. Meanwhile, Sarah continued her research into Max's mysterious transfer from police custody to Jack Thompson. Public records requests were stonewalled or returned heavily redacted. Former colleagues of Wilson's suddenly became unavailable for interviews. The wall of silence suggested something beyond simple negligence. 3 weeks after her arrest, Sarah was approached by Officer Michael Reeves, a young patrolman who had joined the force shortly before Wilson's retirement. "I can't be seen talking to you," he said urgently, sliding into the booth across from her at the diner on the edge of town. "But there's something you should know about Max's last case." According to Reeves, the drug bust that had caught Kevin Thompson hadn't been as straightforward as reported. The quantity of narcotics recovered had been significant, far more than should have been present for a small-time dealer like Kevin. Yet only a fraction was ever logged into evidence. Wilson was lead officer, Reeves explained in a low voice. He controlled the scene, controlled the evidence processing. A lot of us had questions, but nobody wanted to raise them officially. "You think Wilson was skimming drugs?" Sarah asked. Keeping her voice equally quiet, Reeves shrugged uncomfortably. "I'm not accusing anyone of anything. I'm just saying the numbers didn't add up." And a month later, Wilson suddenly decides to retire early and Max disappears. This new information cast Wilson's association with Jack Thompson in an even more suspicious light. Was it possible their antagonism was a front? Could Jack's custody of Max be connected to whatever had happened during that bust? Sarah's investigation took another unexpected turn when she met Thomas Jenkins, a former member of Jack's motorcycle club who had parted ways with the group years earlier. Jenkins approached her after a community meeting about Max's situation. "Thompson isn't what you think," Jenkins told her, refusing her offer of coffee. "Man's got layers. After his wife died, something changed in him. He's still tough as nails, mean as a snake when crossed. But there's more to that story with the dog." "What do you mean?" Sarah pressed. Jenkins hesitated. "Not my place to tell his business. Just saying you might want to look deeper before you judge. Ask around about what happened on Route 16 2 winters back, during that big blizzard." The story Sarah uncovered contradicted everything she thought she knew about Jack Thompson. During a severe snowstorm, Jack had discovered a car off the road, its driver trapped and hypothermic. Despite dangerous conditions, he had stayed with the stranger for hours until emergency services could reach them, likely saving the driver's life. Never wanted recognition. The rescued driver, an elderly man named Howard Brennan, told Sarah when she tracked him down. "Refused the reward I offered. Just said anybody would have done the same." Which is bull. Nobody else stopped that night. This glimpse of Jack's character complicated Sarah's understanding of Max's situation. If Jack was capable of such compassion, why keep Max in such terrible conditions? The contradiction nagged at her. Equally puzzling were reports from neighbors who swore they occasionally heard Jack talking to the dog through the shed door late at night, his voice lacking its usual harshness. One neighbor claimed to have seen Jack sitting outside the shed during a thunderstorm, apparently keeping the dog company during the frightening noise. While the legal process crawled forward and community debate raged, Sarah took steps to prepare for Max's eventual rescue. She converted an outbuilding at Second Chance Ranch into a rehabilitation space specifically designed for a dog with his injuries, ramps instead of steps, orthopedic bedding, a harness system to help him regain strength in his hind legs. She also began working with another former canine officer, a Belgian Malinois named Rex, who had lost a leg to cancer and been surrendered by his owners when they couldn't afford his care. Rex's presence at the ranch served dual purposes, helping Sarah learn specific techniques for rehabilitating working dogs and providing a potential companion for Max if she succeeded in rescuing him, despite court orders to stay away. Sarah drove past Jack's property regularly, parking at a distance that technically complied with the restraining order while allowing her to monitor the situation. On several occasions, she observed Jack carrying what appeared to be fresh bedding toward the shed. Once, she glimpsed him sitting outside the small structure, head bowed as if in conversation. These observations suggested a relationship more complex than simple cruelty, reinforcing Thomas Jenkins's cryptic comments. Whatever Jack's original motivation for taking Max, 4 years had created some form of bond, however twisted. 6 weeks after her arrest, with her trial still pending and legal efforts to remove Max seemingly stalled in bureaucratic quicksand, Sarah received an unexpected phone call from Ellen Dawson. "You need to come to the clinic right now," the veterinarian said without preamble, "and bring that special bed you set up for Max." "What's happened?" Sarah asked, already reaching for her keys. "Jack Thompson just showed up with Max in the back of his truck," Ellen explained, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "Said to call you. Said it was time for the dog to go home. Sarah's tires scattered gravel as she pulled into the veterinary clinic's parking lot. The rational part of her brain, the part shaped by military discipline and medical training, warned her this could be a trap, some new angle in the ongoing battle over Max. But logic couldn't override the surge of hope that propelled her through the clinic doors. Ellen Dawson met her in the reception area, her usually calm demeanor replaced by tense urgency. "He's in exam room 3. Jack brought him in about 20 minutes ago." "Jack's still here?" Sarah asked, scanning the waiting area. "Parking lot, sitting in his truck. Hasn't moved since he carried Max in." Ellen lowered her voice. "Sarah, I've never seen anything like it. That dog is in terrible shape, but the way Thompson handled him, it wasn't what I expected." Sarah pushed through the door into exam room 3 and froze. Max lay on the examination table, even more emaciated in the harsh fluorescent lighting than he'd appeared in the dim shed. His ribs stood out sharply against dull fur, and the muscles in his hind legs had atrophied to almost nothing. But it was his eyes that caught Sarah alert and watching the door as if he'd been waiting for her specifically. "Hey there, big guy," she said softly, approaching slowly. "Remember me." Max's tail thumped weakly against the metal table, a gesture so earnest it brought tears to Sarah's eyes. She gently ran her hands along his body, cataloging his condition in the automatic way of someone with medical training. The spine was the worst, a pronounced curve where there should have been a straight line, telling the story of an old injury improperly healed. "Has he been examined yet?" she asked Ellen, who had followed her into the room. "Basic assessment only." "I was waiting for you before sedating him for x-rays." Ellen hesitated. "Thompson said you'd want to be here, said you'd want to know exactly what you're taking on." The implication was clear. Jack was surrendering Max to her care, acknowledging that the dog needed more than he could provide. Ellen continued her examination, confirming Sarah's worst fears. In addition to the spinal damage, Max suffered from muscle atrophy, pressure sores, and malnutrition. A series of x-rays revealed the full extent of the spinal injury, an old fracture that had healed improperly, putting pressure on the nerves that controlled his hind legs. "It's not fixable," Ellen concluded gently as they reviewed the films. "Not after this long. With physical therapy, good nutrition, and medication, he might regain some function, but he'll never run normally again. Sarah stared at the ghostly images, anger and sadness warring within her. 4 years, she murmured. 4 years in that shed while this injury got worse. There's something else you should know, Ellen said, pulling out a small handheld scanner. She ran it over Max's shoulder, then showed Sarah the display. He's microchipped, standard procedure for police K9s. Can you access the information? Ellen nodded. Already did. It confirms he's Max. K9 officer, number A42J. Born September 2016. Handler, David Wilson. So there's definitive proof he was department property, Sarah said. The implication's clear. They can't claim Jack acquired him legally. There's more, Ellen added, her expression troubled. The chip was last scanned by a clinic in Millerton about 2 hours from here. Date was 4 years ago, right around when Max supposedly retired. The scan notes indicate treatment for a severe back injury consistent with these X-rays. Sarah's mind raced. So, someone took him for treatment right after the injury. But then what? How did he end up with Jack? The sound of the clinic's front door opening interrupted their conversation. Through the exam room window, Sarah could see Jack Thompson standing awkwardly in the reception area. His imposing frame somehow diminished under the bright lights. He spoke briefly to the receptionist, then turned toward the exit. I need to talk to him, Sarah said, already moving toward the door. Sarah? Wait, Ellen cautioned. The restraining order doesn't apply if he initiated contact. Sarah finished. He brought Max here. He asked for me specifically. She caught up to Jack in the parking lot as he was climbing into his truck, a battered Ford that had seen better decades. Thompson, he paused, 1 foot on the running board, but didn't turn around. Dog's yours now. Paperwork's with the vet. That's it, Sarah demanded, anger overriding caution. 4 years of keeping him chained in a shed, and now you just hand him over. No explanation. Jack's shoulders tensed visibly. What do you want from me? Lady, I brought him in. Didn't I? Could have just shot him, buried him out back where nobody would ever find him. I want to know why, Sarah insisted, moving to face him. Why keep a police dog locked up for 4 years? Why surrender him now? For a long moment, Jack simply stared at her, his weathered face unreadable. Then, surprisingly, he let out a heavy sigh and leaned against the truck's door. Storm's coming, he said, nodding toward the horizon where dark clouds were gathering. Weather Service says it'll be bad, flash flood warnings all over the county. Sarah frowned at this apparent non sequitur. What's that got to do with Max? My property sits low, that shed. Jack's voice trailed off momentarily. It floods. Happened before. Couple years back. Had to move him to the cabin till the water receded. Understanding dawned slowly. You were worried about him drowning. Jack's jaw tightened. Look, I did what I came to do. Dog's yours. Take better care of him than I did. That's not an answer, Sarah persisted. Why did you have him in the first place? How did a police K9 end up with you of all people? The first fat raindrops began to fall, pattering against the truck's metal roof. Jack looked up at the darkening sky, then back at Sarah. You really want answers? You're not going to like what you hear. Try me, Sarah challenged. Jack seemed to weigh something in his mind before nodding toward her vehicle. Follow me. There's something you should see. Against her better judgment, Sarah found herself trailing Jack's truck as it wound through the back roads of Pinewood County. The rain intensified, reducing visibility and turning the dirt road to mud. After 20 minutes, they pulled up to what appeared to be an abandoned barn set back from the highway. Jack was already out of his truck when Sarah parked, pulling a flashlight from his glove compartment. "In here," he said gruffly, heading toward the barn's sagging door. Every instinct warned Sarah this could be dangerous, following a man with a violent past to an isolated location during a developing storm. But the need for answers overrode caution. She grabbed her own flashlight and followed, staying a cautious distance behind. The barn's interior was largely empty, save for some rusted farm equipment and moldering hay bales. Jack led her to the back corner, where a makeshift arena had been constructed from plywood and chicken wire. "Dog fighting," Sarah realized aloud, disgust evident in her voice. Jack's expression hardened. "Not mine. I don't participate in that sickness. But yeah, this is where they held them. Every other Saturday for years. Local cops knew about it. Turned a blind eye." "What does this have to do with Max?" Jack's flashlight beam played across the dirt floor, highlighting dark stains that even years couldn't fully erase. 4 years ago, I was driving home late. Storm like this one. Saw something moving on the roadside. Thought it was a deer hit by a car. Stopped to check." He paused, seeming to gather himself. "It was a dog, German Shepherd, half dead, covered in blood. Someone had dumped him after he'd outlived his usefulness, I guess." Sarah's breath caught as the implications became clear. "You're saying that was Max. That's how you found him?" Jack nodded grimly. "Didn't know what he was at first. Just a wounded animal. I loaded him up. Was going to take him to the emergency vet in Millerton." "But you didn't," Sarah prompted when he fell silent. "Got about halfway there when I recognized him. Police canine that took down my boy." Jack's face darkened with the memory. "My first thought was to drive right back and leave him where I found him, eye for an eye. You know," lightning flashed outside, momentarily illuminating the forgotten arena in stark relief. Jack continued, his voice dropping almost to a whisper. "But I couldn't do it. Animal didn't choose his job." "Did he?" "So I took him to the clinic anyway. Paid cash. Gave a fake name. The microchip scan." Sarah murmured. "That was you?" "Vet said his back was broken. Said he'd never walk right again. Recommended putting him down." Jack's jaw tightened. "I wasn't ready to make that call. Figured I'd take him home. See if he improved." "Why not return him to the police department?" Sarah asked. Jack's laugh was harsh in the empty barn. "And tell them what?" "That I found their missing dog after he'd been used in illegal fights that they were taking payoffs to ignore. That's assuming they didn't put him there themselves." Sarah's mind raced to process this new information. Could Wilson have sold Max to dogfighters after the injury made him less useful as a police K-9? It seemed unthinkably cruel. Yet it would explain the officer's suspicious behavior and sudden wealth. "The shed," she began, "wasn't ideal," Jack acknowledged grimly. "But it was what I had. Couldn't keep him in the cabin, too many people come by. Someone would have recognized him, and I couldn't exactly take him for walks in town." The rain had intensified, drumming relentlessly against the barn's metal roof. Through the open door, Sarah could see water already pooling in the low areas of the property. "We need to get back," Jack said, eyeing the rising water with concern. "Roads flood out here quick." As they hurried back to their vehicles, Sarah's mind churned with this new perspective. Jack Thompson, who she'd vilified as Max's abuser, had actually rescued him from something potentially worse. Yet he'd also kept the dog in deplorable conditions for years, hidden away from proper veterinary care, The drive back was treacherous. Rain sheeting across the windshield faster than the wipers could clear it. Sarah kept Jack's taillights in view, following as he navigated the increasingly flooded roads with the confidence of local knowledge. They were crossing the old timber bridge over Pinewood Creek when disaster struck. The creek, already swollen from days of spring melt, had transformed into a raging torrent under the relentless downpour. As Jack's truck reached the midpoint of the bridge, a massive section of debris, fallen trees, and other wreckage swept downstream, slammed into the structure's supports. Sarah watched in horror as the bridge shuddered violently. Jack's truck lurched sideways as timbers cracked beneath it. For a sickening moment, the vehicle seemed balanced on the edge, and then it plunged into the churning waters below. Without hesitation, Sarah grabbed her phone to call emergency services, but the screen showed no signal. The storm had knocked out reception. Training overtook panic as she mentally cataloged her options. The creek wasn't exceptionally deep under normal conditions, but the floodwaters made it unpredictable and dangerous. Through the curtain of rain, she could see Jack's truck partially submerged about 30 feet downstream, wedged against fallen trees. The driver's side was underwater, but the passenger side remained partially above the surface. A dark figure, Jack was climbing awkwardly onto the roof. Clearly injured but alive, Sarah's military experience had included swift water rescue training. She knew the dangers, knew that attempting a rescue alone was against every protocol. She also knew that waiting for help that might not arrive in time wasn't an option she could live with. The storm's fury was building toward its peak, the wind driving the rain in horizontal sheets. As Sarah made her decision, she grabbed the emergency rope from her truck's storage compartment and moved toward the creek bank, calculating angles and anchor points, preparing to attempt what might be the most dangerous rescue of her life. The rain fell in unforgiving sheets as Sarah secured her rope to a sturdy oak at the creek's edge. Her years as a combat medic had taught her to function through fear, to let training override instinct. The creek had transformed into a raging monster, brown with mud and debris, its usual gentle burble now a roar that nearly drowned out Jack's shouts. "Stay there!" she called, though doubted he could hear her over the storm. "I'm coming to you." Jack clung to the roof of his partially submerged truck, one arm clutching what appeared to be an injured shoulder. The vehicle had wedged against a fallen tree, temporarily stable but visibly shifting with each surge of the floodwaters. There was no telling how long it would hold. Sarah tied the rope around her waist, forming the rescue harness she'd practiced countless times during military training. The techniques were meant for desert rescue, not raging floodwaters, but the principles remained the same: secure anchor, controlled approach, stable extraction. With a deep breath, she waded into the water. The current's power was immediate and shocking. Even at the edge, it pulled at her legs with surprising force. By mid-thigh, she was struggling to maintain her footing on the slippery creek bed. But she pressed forward, letting the rope take her weight as she navigated toward the truck, testing each step before committing her weight. "Thompson," she shouted over the roar of water and wind, "can you move toward me?" He shook his head, gesturing to his leg now, trapped somehow against the roof rack. Sarah could see blood mixing with rainwater on his face. He'd been more severely injured in the crash than she'd initially thought. It took nearly 15 minutes of careful maneuvering before Sarah reached the truck, the icy water now at her chest, each step a battle against the current that threatened to sweep her away. She pulled herself onto the truck's hood, the metal slick under her hands. "My leg's pinned," Jack gasped when she reached him, his usual gruffness replaced by pain-filled clarity. "Roof caved in when it rolled. Can't pull free?" Sarah assessed the situation with clinical detachment. Jack's right leg was indeed trapped between the crushed roof and the roof rack. The rising water had nearly reached his position. Within minutes, he'd be submerged. "I need to free your leg," she explained, already searching for leverage. "It's going to hurt." Jack's laugh was more a grimace. "Figured as much." Using a piece of broken side mirror as an improvised pry bar, Sarah worked to create space between the crumpled metal. Each movement of the truck brought fresh curses from Jack and sent spikes of panic through Sarah's calculated calm. The vehicle wasn't stable. The entire rescue balanced on a knife's edge of timing and luck. When she finally created enough space to free his leg, the damage was immediately apparent. The lower shin was clearly broken. Bone visible through torn jeans and flesh. Blood pulsed steadily from the wound. "Too much blood. Tourniquet," she muttered, already pulling off her belt. As she worked to secure it above the injury, Jack's breathing grew more labored, his face ashen beneath the dirt and blood. "This wasn't how I pictured today going," he managed. Attempting humor despite the pain, Sarah tightened the belt, eliciting a sharp hiss. "Funny. I always pictured our first date involving a flood and possible death." The weak joke seemed to steady him. Once the bleeding was controlled, Sarah faced their next challenge, getting him off the increasingly unstable vehicle and back to shore. The rope would support one person's weight reliably, but two was pushing its limits, especially against the powerful current. "We need to move now," she urged, helping him into a seated position. Waters still rising. As if to emphasize her point, the truck shifted ominously, the current having eroded more of its tenuous footing against the fallen tree. Jack nodded grimly. Understanding the situation without further explanation, they were halfway to shore, Sarah supporting most of Jack's weight as they fought the current inch by inch. When disaster struck again, a massive section of upstream debris, an entire uprooted tree, came barreling down the flooded creek. Sarah saw it coming just seconds before impact. "Hold on!" she shouted, tightening her grip on both Jack and the rope. The debris struck the truck with a sound like thunder, dislodging it from its temporary anchor. The sudden movement yanked the rope taut, nearly pulling it from Sarah's grasp. She felt Jack slipping from her hold, his injured body unable to maintain its grip against the current's renewed assault. What happened next occurred in heartbeats, but would replay in Sarah's mind for months afterward. Jack, seeing he was about to be swept away, looked directly into her eyes. There was a moment of perfect clarity between them. Recognition, understanding, decision. "Let go," he said clearly, already loosening his grip on her. "Rope won't hold us both." "Don't you dare," Sarah snarled, tightening her hold on his jacket. "We're almost there." But Jack had made his choice. With a strength born of desperation, he pushed away from her, deliberately breaking her grip. The current caught him immediately, pulling him downstream with terrifying speed. Sarah screamed his name, instinctively lunging after him before the rope jerked her back. Training warred with instinct, continue to shore where she could get help, or abandon safety to attempt a nearly impossible rescue. In that split second of indecision, she saw Jack's body slam into another collection of debris about 50 feet downstream, then disappear beneath the churning surface. The next hours passed in a blur of emergency responses. Once she'd made it to shore, Sarah had driven through flooded back roads until finding cell reception, then coordinated with emergency services already overwhelmed by storm-related calls. By nightfall, search and rescue teams were combing the creek's edges, but darkness and continuing rain hampered their efforts. At Ellen's clinic, Max remained unaware of the drama unfolding around him. Sarah checked on him briefly before returning to the search site, finding him sleeping under sedation, his broken body finally getting the medical care it had needed for years. "You should stay with him," Ellen urged when Sarah prepared to leave again. "There's nothing more you can do out there tonight." But Sarah couldn't rest while Jack remained missing. The man she'd once seen as an enemy had risked everything to save her. Whatever his past crimes, whatever his flaws, that single act of selflessness demanded recognition and rescue. If rescue was still possible. Dawn broke on a landscape transformed by the flood's destruction. The rain had finally stopped, but Pinewood Creek remained swollen beyond its banks. Fields and low-lying roads submerged under muddy water. The search resumed with daylight. Additional teams arriving from neighboring counties. Sarah had just returned to her truck for a brief rest when Sheriff Roberts approached, his cruiser splashing through puddles as it pulled alongside her. "Miller," he acknowledged with a stiff nod. "Got something you should know." Her heart sank, preparing for the worst. "Found Thompson about 2 miles downstream," Roberts continued, his usual antagonism notably absent. "He's alive. Barely. Medevac's flying him to County General now." Relief flooded through Sarah with an intensity that left her lightheaded. How bad? Bad enough. Hypothermia. Blood loss from that leg. Internal injuries from being tossed around. Roberts hesitated, something uncharacteristically like respect showing in his expression. Paramedics said if he hadn't managed to flag down that fisherman when he did, he wouldn't have made it another hour. "I need to get to the hospital," Sarah said, already reaching for her keys. Roberts raised a hand to stop her. "There's something else. When they were loading him into the helicopter," Thompson was conscious for a minute, kept saying something about Wilson and the dog fighting, wasn't making much sense. But he trailed off, clearly uncomfortable. "But it was enough to make you wonder." Sarah finished for him. Robert's jaw tightened. "I've requested the case files for Max's retirement and the drug bust involving Kevin Thompson. Should have them by end of day." It was as close to an admission of potential wrongdoing as she was likely to get from him. Sarah nodded acknowledgment and started her truck, mind already racing ahead to the hospital, to Jack, to the truth that seemed finally within reach. County General's emergency department was chaotic. Beds filled with injuries from the storm. Jack had already been taken to surgery by the time Sarah arrived. A harried nurse could tell her only that his condition was critical but stable. The orthopedic team working to save his shattered leg. Sarah found herself in the surgical waiting room, still wearing clothes stained with creek mud and Jack's blood, surrounded by strangers facing their own medical crises. Hours passed in that peculiar hospital limbo, time stretching and contracting in the harsh fluorescent light. It was nearly evening when the surgeon finally appeared, exhaustion evident in the lines of his face. "Family of Jack Thompson." Sarah stood, suddenly self-conscious of her disheveled appearance. "Friend," she said, the word feeling strange yet somehow true. "How is he?" The surgeon's expression told her everything before he spoke. "We did everything we could. But the damage was extensive. The leg had been without proper circulation for too long. The infection had already spread to his bloodstream." Sarah felt the floor tilt beneath her. "Are you saying he's alive?" The surgeon clarified quickly. "But we couldn't save the leg. Given his other injuries and the onset of sepsis, amputation was the only option." The surgeon continued explaining medical details that Sarah absorbed automatically through her medical training: antibiotics, recovery timeline, rehabilitation prospects. But beneath the clinical information, a deeper understanding was forming. Jack Thompson would never again be the imposing figure who had kept Max prisoner for 4 years. His life had irrevocably changed, just as he had changed Max's life. The symmetry was both tragic and fitting. The morning light filtered through the Venetian blinds of Jack Thompson's hospital room, casting striped shadows across his still form. 3 days had passed since the emergency surgery that saved his life but cost him his right leg below the knee. The doctors kept him heavily sedated through the worst of it, his body fighting both the trauma of amputation and the raging infection that had necessitated it. Sarah visited daily, often sitting beside his bed for hours despite the nurse's gentle suggestions that she go home and rest. Something had shifted between them during those desperate moments in the flood, a connection forged in crisis that defied their previous antagonism. She felt responsible for him now, though she couldn't have explained exactly why. On the 4th day, Sarah arrived to find Jack awake, his weathered face gaunt, but his eyes clear for the first time since the rescue. "Thought I dreamed you," he said, voice rough from disuse. "The flood, you pulling me out." Sarah poured a cup of water from the bedside pitcher and held it to his lips. "Not a dream, though I'm not sure pulling you out is accurate, given that you decided to go for a swim halfway through." A ghost of a smile touched Jack's lips. "Always been a lousy rescue victim." His eyes traveled down to where the blanket lay flat where his lower right leg should have been. "They told me about the leg." "I'm sorry," Sarah said simply. Jack was quiet for a long moment, staring at the ceiling. "Seems fitting somehow. Dog can't walk right because of me. Now neither can I." "Max's condition wasn't your fault," Sarah reminded him, settling into the chair beside his bed. "You found him already injured. Kept him chained in a shed for 4 years. Jack countered, a flash of his old harshness returning. "That's on me." Before Sarah could respond, the door opened to admit Sheriff Roberts, accompanied by a gray-haired man in an ill-fitting suit whom Sarah recognized as Agent Harold Mercer from the State Bureau of Investigation. The sheriff's expression was uncharacteristically solemn. "Thompson," he acknowledged with a nod. "Good to see you conscious." "Miller," he added, his usual antagonism toward Sarah notably absent. "Sheriff," Jack responded warily. "This a social call, or am I under arrest from my hospital bed?" "Neither," Roberts replied. "Agent Mercer here has some questions about statements you made after your rescue, about Officer Wilson and certain, activities." Jack's eyes narrowed, darting between the two men. "What kind of activities?" Agent Mercer stepped forward, his manner professional but not unkind. "Mr. Thompson, we've been investigating an interstate dog-fighting ring for nearly 2 years. Your comments about Officer Wilson's involvement, though disjointed, align with other evidence we've gathered. We'd like to take your formal statement." Jack shifted uncomfortably in his bed, wincing as the movement disturbed his surgical sight. "Don't know what good it'll do. Been trying to tell people about that operation for years. Nobody wanted to listen." "We're listening now," Mercer assured him. "Things have changed. We've had Officer Wilson under surveillance for the past 6 months." This revelation stunned both Jack and Sarah into momentary silence. Jack recovered first. 6 months. Where were you 4 years ago when he was selling police dogs to be torn apart for entertainment? Mercer's expression remained neutral. "New evidence came to light that allowed us to obtain surveillance authorization. I can't discuss an ongoing investigation in detail, but I can tell you that your experience with the K-9 officer designated Max potentially provides a crucial missing piece." Over the next hour, Jack recounted the night he'd found Max abandoned on the roadside, his condition suggesting he'd been used in fights and then discarded when his injuries made him no longer valuable. He described taking Max to the veterinary clinic in Millerton, where the microchip scan had confirmed the dog's identity as a police canine. Vet wanted to put him down, Jack explained, fatigue evident in his voice. Said his back was too damaged. He'd never recover properly. I couldn't do it. Not right then. Why didn't you report finding him? Roberts asked. Jack's laugh was harsh. To who you... When my boy was sitting in prison because of that same dog. Besides, by then I'd figured out what was happening. Wasn't hard to connect the dots between Wilson's sudden retirement, Max disappearing, and the fights happening at the old Davidson barn. You had proof Wilson was involved, Mercer pressed. Saw him there once, about 6 months before I found Max. I was driving past the barn. Noticed cars parked where they shouldn't be. Got curious. Jack's expression darkened with the memory. Recognized Wilson's truck. Thought maybe he was there to bust the operation. So I stuck around, watching from the woods. But he wasn't arresting anybody. He was collecting money, acting like some kind of manager. Sarah listened with growing horror. The idea that a police officer, the very handler entrusted with Max's care, could betray him so completely was almost incomprehensible. Why keep Max hidden all those years? She asked quietly. Why not get him proper care? Jack's gaze shifted to her, something vulnerable briefly visible beneath his gruff exterior. At first, it was just survival. I'm a felon with a record. If I showed up with an injured police dog, who's going to believe I didn't steal him? Then when he started healing wrong, getting worse instead of better, I was in too deep. Didn't know how to fix it. So you just kept him locked away, Robert said, disapproval evident in his tone. I did what I could, Jack replied defensively. Fed him, cleaned up after him, tried to exercise him when his legs would cooperate. He paused, something like shame crossing his features. It wasn't enough. I know that now. Agent Mercer made notes throughout the conversation, his expression revealing nothing. When Jack's account was complete, he closed his notebook and considered the injured man thoughtfully. Mr. Thompson, given your cooperation and the circumstances, I'm prepared to recommend that no charges be filed against you regarding your possession of the K-9 officer. However, this depends on your willingness to testify against Officer Wilson and others involved in the fighting ring. You'll need to get in line, Jack replied grimly. Man's made plenty of enemies over the years. After Mercer and Roberts departed, promising to return the following day for a formal statement, Jack slumped back against his pillows, the interview having clearly drained what little energy he had. You should rest, Sarah suggested, rising to leave. Wait. Jack's hand moved toward her, stopping short of actual contact. The dog, Max, how is he? Sarah smiled slightly, touched by the genuine concern in his voice. Stable. Ellen doctor, Dawson has him on antibiotics and pain management. His prognosis is guarded but improving. Jack nodded, relief evident in his expression. Good. That's good. As Sarah turned to leave, Jack spoke again, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. Miller, I know I don't deserve any favors, but could you bring me something from my cabin? There's a box under the bed. Has some old photos I'd like to have. Sarah agreed, curious about this unexpected request but unwilling to press for details given Jack's exhausted state. The following day brought a flurry of activity. Agent Mercer returned with a court stenographer to take Jack's formal deposition. Shortly afterward, news broke across Pinewood County of David Wilson's arrest on multiple charges including corruption, evidence tampering, and animal cruelty. The story exploded through the small community, locals stunned to discover the respected former officer's double life. While media attention focused on Wilson's arrest, Sarah made the drive to Jack's cabin to retrieve the requested box. The small structure stood untouched since the flood, its surroundings still bearing evidence of the water's destructive path. The shed where Max had spent 4 years was partially collapsed, its door hanging open like a broken mouth. Inside the cabin, Sarah found surprising order among the sparse furnishings. No empty liquor bottles or drug paraphernalia. None of the chaos she'd unconsciously expected from a man with Jack's reputation. Instead, the space was clean, if somewhat Spartan, with a few well-worn paperbacks stacked beside a comfortable reading chair. The box beneath the bed was old, a wooden cigar case with brass hinges. Inside, Sarah found exactly what Jack had described: photographs, carefully preserved in plastic sleeves. Most showed a younger Jack with a pretty dark-haired woman and a small boy, Kevin. Presumably, in some, Jack wore the leather vest of the Steel Wheels Motorcycle Club, looking fierce and proud beside gleaming motorcycles, but his expression in the family photos was different, softer, genuinely happy. Beneath the photos lay an unexpected item, a small, worn, stuffed dog, obviously a child's toy that had been loved to near destruction. Tucked beside it was a creased newspaper clipping about Max from his early days with the police department. The juxtaposition was puzzling, but Sarah replaced everything exactly as she'd found it, respecting Jack's privacy, even as questions multiplied in her mind. When she returned to the hospital that evening, she found Jack sitting up in bed, the local news playing quietly on the wall-mounted television. The lead story showed Officer Wilson being led into the county courthouse in handcuffs, his formerly proud face now haggard and hostile beneath the camera flashes. "Brought your box," Sarah said, placing it carefully on the bedside table. Jack nodded thanks, making no move to open it in her presence. "They're saying Wilson might get 15 years, more if they connect him to other dogs that disappeared. It doesn't bring those years back for Max," Sarah observed, taking her usual seat beside the bed. "No," Jack agreed somberly. "Nothing does that." They sat in surprisingly comfortable silence for several minutes, watching the news cycle through weather reports and other local stories. Finally, Jack spoke again, his voice low. "There's something you should know about Max's back, about how it really happened." Sarah turned to him, sensing the importance of whatever he was about to reveal. "I thought you said he was already injured when you found him." "He was," Jack confirmed. "But I know how it happened. Kevin told me. When he called from prison after I found Max." He reached for the box, opening it to extract the newspaper clipping about Max. "Kevin recognized him too, from the day he was arrested, said there was more to the story than what made the reports." Jack explained that according to Kevin, the drug bust that day had gone very differently than the official account. Wilson had been skimming drugs and cash for months, taking advantage of his position as canine handler to manipulate evidence. Kevin had been a small-time dealer, yes, but he'd also been a witness to Wilson's corruption. When Max alerted on the stash, Wilson panicked, Jack explained. Kevin wasn't supposed to be there that day. Wilson had been taking a cut from the main supplier for months, letting certain shipments pass through undetected, but Max, he didn't know about the arrangement. He was just doing his job. "So what happened to Max's back?" Sarah pressed gently. Jack's expression darkened with old anger. "After Kevin was in custody, Wilson took Max back to his vehicle, drove to a remote location, tried to discipline him for alerting on the wrong stash one Wilson was protecting, beat him so badly his spine fractured." Sarah felt physically ill at the revelation. "His own handler did that to him." Jack nodded grimly. Kevin overheard Wilson on his phone at the station, arranging to retire Max since he couldn't be controlled anymore. That's when Max disappeared officially, but instead of retirement, Wilson sold him to the fighting ring to cover his tracks. Dog was damaged goods as a police canine, but still valuable as bait for training fighting dogs. The full picture was finally becoming clear. A corrupt officer willing to sacrifice his loyal partner to protect his criminal enterprises. A dog whose only crime had been performing his duty too well. And Jack Thompson, whose grudge against police had transformed into an unexpected rescue mission. "Why didn't you tell this story before?" Sarah asked. "When I first confronted you about Max." Jack's laugh was bitter. "Who'd believe it? Ex-con with a grudge claims decorated officer is corrupt. Claims the missing police dog was abused by his own handler. I'd have been laughed out of town." He paused, fatigue evident in his voice. Or worse. As Sarah drove home that evening, the scattered pieces of Max's story finally arranged themselves into a coherent whole. The tragedy wasn't just what had happened to Max, but how many people had failed him, his handler, through deliberate cruelty, the police department through negligence or complicity, and even Jack, whose rescue had turned into its own form of imprisonment. But now, with Wilson arrested and Max receiving proper care, there was a chance for something neither man nor dog had experienced in 4 long years' justice, and perhaps even healing. 1 year passed like the changing seasons over Montana, gradually at first. Then, all at once, the snow of winter gave way to spring rains, summer heat, autumn colors, and back to the pristine white blanket that transformed Second Chance Ranch into a peaceful haven for Max. Each season marked progress in a journey of recovery that no one had believed possible a year earlier. The morning sun cast long shadows across the ranch's main yard as Sarah Miller stepped onto her porch, coffee mug warming her hands against the December chill. From her vantage point, she could see the special ramp she'd built leading down from the porch, a concession to the 4-legged residents who couldn't navigate steps. Chief among them was Max, whose damaged spine had indeed proven permanent but far from defeating. "Morning, old friend?" Sarah called as Max emerged from the barn where he preferred to sleep, despite the comfortable bed she'd prepared in the house. His gait remained uneven, his back legs supported by a custom wheelchair Ellen Dawson had helped design, but his eyes, those soulful amber eyes that had first captured Sarah's attention through a grimy shed window, now shone with life and purpose. Max made his way toward her with determined dignity, each movement a testament to his resilience. The wheelchair had initially frustrated him, his proud nature rebelling against dependence, but time and patience had won out, and now he maneuvered with surprising agility across the packed snow, stopping at the bottom of the ramp to look up at Sarah expectantly. "Yes, he's coming today," she answered the unspoken question. After months of working with Max, Sarah sometimes felt he understood English better than most humans. "Should be here around noon," as if on cue. The distant sound of an engine broke the morning stillness. Sarah checked her watch, barely 9 o'clock. Too early for their expected visitor. Squinting against the winter sun, she spotted an unfamiliar SUV navigating the long driveway that connected the ranch to the main road. Max's posture changed subtly. Alert but not alarmed. His days as a police canine had left indelible training, his ability to assess potential threats undiminished by his injuries. Sarah watched as he identified the vehicle as non-threatening and relaxed, his focus returning to the breakfast she hadn't yet served. The SUV parked near the main house, and a woman emerged mid-30s, professionally dressed despite the rural setting, a leather portfolio tucked under her arm. Sarah recognized her immediately as Melissa Carter, the prosecuting attorney handling David Wilson's case. "Ms. Miller," Carter called, picking her way carefully across the snowy yard. "Sorry to drop by unannounced. I tried calling, but service out here is still spotty after last week's storm." Sarah welcomed her inside, where the warmth of a wood stove created a cozy contrast to the winter landscape. Max followed, the soft whir of his wheelchair accompanying his movement across the hardwood floors. "The trial starts next week," Carter explained, accepting the offered coffee. "I wanted to discuss Max's role in person." Sarah's protective instincts flared. "We've been over this. Max isn't testifying in court. The stress would be too much." Carter smiled reassuringly. "Not asking him to testify, but his presence during Jack Thompson's testimony could be powerful. Seeing the actual victim, the jury understanding what Wilson's actions did to a loyal service animal." She trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air. Before Sarah could respond, the sound of tires on gravel announced another arrival. This time, it was the scheduled visitor, a modified pickup truck with hand controls, specially equipped for a driver missing his right leg. Jack Thompson had changed as dramatically as Max over the past year. The wild beard was gone, replaced by a neatly trimmed salt-and-pepper goatee. His once unkempt hair was cut short, revealing more gray than anyone had realized was there. But the most profound change was in his eyes. The perpetual anger had given way to something more complex, a hard-earned wisdom that acknowledged past mistakes without being defined by them. He navigated from truck to wheelchair with practiced efficiency, having mastered the transition during months of rehabilitation. Like Max, he had initially resisted the wheelchair, insisting on crutches until a particularly bad fall convinced him of the merits of accepting appropriate tools. "You're early?" Sarah greeted him from the porch. Jack's smile transformed his face, softening the hard edges forged by years of bitterness. "Traffic was light," he replied dryly, gesturing to the empty rural road beyond the property. Max approached Jack with what could only be described as joy, a far cry from the fear he'd shown when first rescued. The bond between them had evolved through weekly visits that began as part of Jack's community service, an arrangement Sarah had suggested to the judge as an alternative to jail time. Given Jack's role in rescuing Max and his subsequent cooperation with prosecutors, what had started as obligation had transformed into genuine connection. Jack's natural affinity for animals, hidden beneath years of hardened exterior, emerged as he worked with Max and other rescue dogs at the ranch. His experience with rehabilitation, both his own and Max's, proved invaluable as Sarah expanded the ranch's mission to include therapy programs for both animals and people. Inside, introductions were made, and Carter explained her presence. Jack listened thoughtfully, absently scratching behind Max's ears where the dog had settled beside his wheelchair. "You want to use Max as a prop," Jack observed bluntly. "Parade him in front of the jury to get an emotional reaction." Carter didn't flinch at his directness. "I want the jury to see the real impact of Wilson's actions. Max isn't just a case number or a piece of evidence. He's the living consequence of Wilson's betrayal." "And what about Max? What does he get out of reliving his trauma?" Sarah challenged. The prosecutor sighed, setting down her coffee mug. "Look, I understand your concerns, but Wilson's defense is already spinning a narrative that he was the victim of a conspiracy, that Thompson here," she nodded toward Jack, "fabricated the whole story out of vengeance, having Max present, seeing the bond he's formed with both of you. Seeing his injuries, it counters that narrative in a way no testimony alone can accomplish." The discussion continued over another pot of coffee. weighing the potential benefits against the stress it might cause Max. Eventually, a compromise was reached. Max would appear briefly during Jack's testimony, but would be removed if he showed any signs of distress. After Carter departed, Sarah and Jack sat in comfortable silence on the porch, watching Max patrol the perimeter of the yard, his wheelchair leaving parallel tracks in the fresh snow. "Think he remembers Wilson?" Jack asked eventually. Sarah nodded slowly. "Animals remember differently than we do, not in words or constructed narratives, but in feelings, in body responses. He remembers." The upcoming trial loomed large in their thoughts, representing both an ending and a beginning. For Max, it would be the final chapter in the story of his betrayal and abandonment. For Jack, it offered a chance to transform the anger that had defined him for decades into something purposeful. Justice not just for Max, but for all the animals Wilson had exploited. For Sarah, watching the unlikely pair, a former biker with a missing leg and a former police dog with a broken spine, the trial represented something even more profound: confirmation that healing came in unexpected forms, that the most broken beginnings could still lead to wholeness. As the winter sun climbed higher, bathing the ranch in crystalline light, Max completed his patrol and returned to the porch. With deliberate care, he positioned himself between Sarah and Jack's wheelchairs, his body forming a living bridge between two people who had once been adversaries, but now formed the core of his reclaimed world. "Come spring," Jack said quietly, "I'm thinking Max might be ready to help with the Veterans Program." Sarah smiled, understanding the significance of the suggestion. The program, still in development, would pair traumatized service members with rescued animals, creating healing partnerships based on mutual recovery. "I think," she replied, watching Max settle contentedly into the snow, "he's been ready all along. He just needed us to be ready too." Friends, in the twilight of our lives, we've learned that redemption isn't just for the young. We've weathered enough storms to know that second chances don't come with age limits. This story of Max and Jack, a broken police dog and a bitter man, mirrors the journeys many of us face. We've all known betrayal from those we trusted, felt the weight of years spent in our own personal prisons, and faced the painful reality that our bodies aren't what they once were. But like Max, whose damaged spine couldn't crush his spirit, and Jack, who found purpose after losing his leg, we too can find meaning in our brokenness. Remember when neighbors looked out for each other? When a promise meant something? Max never gave up hope during those 4 dark years, and neither should we. His resilience reminds us that our value isn't diminished by our limitations, as winter gives way to spring at Second Chance Ranch. I hope you'll see your own story reflected, not defined by past mistakes or present challenges, but by the courage to forge connections when the world expects bitterness. Because sometimes the most profound healing comes through helping another wounded soul find their way home. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.